Hey everyone, Dan here. We're doing Power Hour on Thursday, July 29th. We're going to take a look at Workhorse today. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And also keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not intended to be, nor should you could take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put the work in for yourself, and come to your own conclusions based on that information. All right, so Workhorse having a bit of a run up today on some good news. We'll see if this lets me drag it over. Okay, so up a bit over 4% today. If we zoom in just to the daily at the moment to see how we ranged out today, we're settling into this bit of a box here. And you know what, I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening at the moment. These would be for shorter term trades only. But if there's a bunch of buys being placed up above this target and then a bunch of sells being placed down below, and as it's moving within this tight range, this would be not based on that activity but based on since this big run up and then pullback. So folks could be looking at this area as sort of a tight buy sell zone. And so that to me would mean that for short-term traders, if we stretch ourselves again above out of this box, say we can get established over $12, I wouldn't be shocked if there's a bunch of buy orders that get hit and potentially push this up quite significantly. On the downside then, of course, if we can't hold probably something like 1160 or so, there's probably, or there could be, a bunch of sell orders that get triggered, and that could push it down quite quickly and quite heavily. So I have to see what happens there, but I did notice this pretty tight range that it's in since that big run up, and we'll have to see how that plays out, of course, but that's what I'm going to be looking at the moment. And actually, I'm going to leave that box there because I want to see tomorrow how that sort of plays out. I just didn't want it to clog up the chart, but it will be fine because it's on the daily. So today we had the news come in, which is what's causing this run-up, CEO with auto experience. And so this person is coming in, and the now previous CEO or soon-to-be previous CEO is going to help in the transition as a consultant. So you can see here his experience. You can certainly look up his Wikipedia or what have you in order to see, but it's certainly a breadth of experience. I don't know exactly what it is that they're leveraging on, whether or not he just knows the industry or the vertical, well enough that it'll be able to really spin the stock in a different direction, and or if he has sort of a team around him, current, former colleagues, what have you, that could be equally beneficial to Workhorse, either as folks coming in and or as folks who some deals could get done with. But we will see as time goes on. Interestingly enough, even with the big catalyst today, or at least big in terms of like the quick spike that it had, even though it then pulled back, the volume staying relatively low. So you see the big spike here in the day as it happened, and now it's just sort of like not doing a ton. Now if you haven't watched my other videos on Workhorse, I really like the company. I think that as a company with an interesting vision, I think that they fit the bill. Now, they've obviously fallen on some pretty hard times, a bunch of which was kicked off when they lost that USPS contract that folks, clearly the market was pricing in as being able to be won by Workhorse. So ever since then, it's been struggling quite a bit, and the loss of that certainly had short sellers come pile in order to help push the price down. But we're coming up toward this top range, so I'll be super interested to see what's going to happen. Now, if we pull things out to the last month, you can see how long I've been tracking Workhorse for. I mean, I have a channel way back here. This was in May, but I mean, these zones go way back. I mean, you see that's where these purple price zones are interacting with price targets way up there. So I've been looking at this one for a while. I used to wheel Workhorse, which was the thing that I was doing at the time, and then I got wheeled out at some point, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a little break from it, but certainly always looking at it, because like I said, to me it's a really interesting company, and I would like to see them succeed, but just because I would like to see them succeed doesn't mean anything. Now, there's that purple bounce zone that I have at 1255. Obviously, at this point, it's not going to bounce off of there since it'll be hitting it as resistance. What I'm going to be most looking at or sort of cautious about at the moment is this area here. We see so much previous topping out. Now, what could be happening, there's sort of two scenarios, which is why when I put these zones in that are of interest to me, I always want to look and see what's happening at the time in which the price actually encounters that zone. So we see here, this used to be, let me just stretch this over. This used to be a really solid support zone, right? Ever since it had this run up here, and that's where it was pulling back into. And then the minute that it lost it, it started hitting it as resistance, and then that just contributed to being pushed down further. Now it has held that 1080 zone really well, so I'm happy with sort of that zone being charted in there and being able to hold up well for us along the way. But what I'm going to be looking for now that it peeled back from that same zone today, so even on that big catalyst, it still hit essentially this red box, and I know it peaked out a little bit above it, but I mean, that doesn't stretch really maybe at all any higher up than this topping out here. Yeah, see, so if I include this wick, that then will include this wick as well. But if we think of this as having topped out now 5 times at this range, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you think of it that way, there's 2 ways in which I look at it if it encounters it again. One, this clearly tells me there's a lot of supply here, meaning there's a lot of people who have shares and are very happy or willing to take a profit in this zone. They're very happy to sell at this point. And so the question, though, becomes, does that supply continue through another round? And if it does, then it might, at some point, be hard for Workhorse to continue to come back up to this zone to try to test it, because on the other end of the spectrum, you need the demand that exists around this 1080 zone to continue to hold. So we see that held at this point, and at this point, and at this point, and at this point. And the question is, how many times can you go to the well before buyers just aren't there anymore? Now, on the other end of that, if it comes up into this red zone, it does have the potential at some point, if it can continue to test it and pressure the sellers that are there, at some point it's just going to blow through that zone, because the sellers that are there are going to have sold what they had to sell, and so that pressure isn't going to be there anymore. And to me, it's tested it so many times in a relatively short period of time, it's kind of getting to that decision point, right? Is the selling pressure that's there going to push the stock down and drive it down again toward this 1080, and the demand's not going to be there? To me, one of these zones has to give way very, very quickly. Either that 1255 needs to establish as support, or this 1080 needs to lose its ability to support. So that's what I'm going to be looking at in the coming days, especially if we make another run toward that zone. Now, on the indicator side of things, we take a look at the MACD here, stretching up nicely at the moment and curling back a little bit. So we might see a little bit of a bearish crossover here. Now the question is going to be if it comes down to the baseline, which isn't that far away. This isn't stretched that far above the baseline. What's it going to do at that point? And also we do see from even this recent activity, this bullish momentum was much stronger than the bullish momentum that we saw today. So it'll be interesting to see what this catalyst can really do for Workhorse in the vast scheme of things. Now, it also ran the RSI up very high. So the other thing I'm going to be looking at is, as the RSI comes down about to where my cursor is, we're on the 50. You see how impactful that's been? Previously I lost my spot. Like all of this area here, all of this area here. That 50 acting as either support or resistance has either allowed it to continue to run up toward or into overbought territory, or if it can't hold it, has pushed it down into or near oversold territory. So I'm going to be, if it does come down and the MACD does have a bearish cross, I'm going to be most interested to see what happens when the RSI approaches that 50. Can it bounce off of it? Can it consolidate and move sideways along it and then make another run up, or does it lose it and head down toward oversold? That said, it could make another run, prematurely back up into overbought, which would be a very good sign of strength before it even comes down and tests that midline. But at some point, it will come down to test that midline. It will take a bit of a breath from this run up that it's had today. Now, because of the run up that it had today, we are seeing some potential for full bullish crossover on the MAs. So right now, this has put Workhorse into an overall bullish formation. Not a formation, a bullish trend. It's established over the 200 MA. The 20 has now crossed over the 200. That's a bullish movement. Now the 50 is getting very, very close to the 200, the yellow and the red. The 50 can cross over the 200, then we'll be in a fully bullish formation. Everything will be in line. Those MAs should provide additional support should Workhorse need it as it comes down to take a breath or what have you. So that's what I'm looking for on that side of things. Now on the data side of things, here's Ortex. Now a couple of things to look at. One, this short interest, in my opinion, because Workhorse has been so heavily shorted, we look here and we go over here on market beats and we see that the 35.8%, this is reported from, well, if we go over here, we can see it also. The exchange reported, they have the last at 50.54. This not so far off. These sometimes have a little bit of a lag or a little bit of a discrepancy, but this is coming in with the 7:15 data. So that's the most recent data as it reports on or about these 2-week reporting periods. But we see a slight increase, even though it was already very high, right? Already in the 30s, which is extremely high percentage of the float being shorted, and even then it was able to pick up more. Now it had peeled back a little bit in the previous reporting dates, but if you compare that to the big uptrends that were coming every single reporting date for several months, it was kind of nothing of a pullback. So shorts are in my opinion, one of two things is going to happen. One, they are going to kind of take the loss on this one and close out, and we could see something of a little squeeze. I think that's less likely, at least at this sort of short of a time frame. I think what's more likely is you see shorts pour in and kind of see this as Workhorse being overextended, and certainly they know that there's tends to be a lot of selling pressure up here, and so they could then kind of ride the wave back down. So what I would expect to happen, but who knows what's in the mind of a short seller, what I would look to see them come in quite heavily the rest of today, tomorrow, and so be interested to see what this says, what Ortex is going to be estimating tomorrow. But we see a slight increase today. The utilization is very high, which will be sort of part of the challenge of shorts continuing to come in too heavily, is almost all of the shares that are available to lend to them have been lent. So that's going to be quite tough. But to the extent to which they can continue to come in and put selling pressure on, I think that they will. Now, if Workhorse can maintain strength, especially if it can establish over that 1255 and then continue on into some of those higher zones that are targeted here that put us a bit over 13, that's when I think you could see the actual stronger potential for a short squeeze. So to me, if we can get Workhorse up, especially there's this big stretch here between 1359 and 1483 from a supply and demand perspective. There's a little bit of a sticky point here on 414, but at that point the percentage gain would have already been so much in a relatively short period of time, and there's a ton of run room there. And so to me, if there's the likelihood for a short squeeze, that's probably where it would occur, but it's going to require Workhorse getting like into the 13s pretty quickly. So it needs to have a big closeout today, it needs to have a big day tomorrow, and at least getting itself up and over, just getting some space, some distance from this red box, which, like I said, at that 1255 would sort of suffice for that criteria alone. But I'm going to be watching this quite closely because the shorts are in this one heavily and have been for a long time. Now, on the analyst side of things, we do have a moderate buy, 4 holds, 2 buys, a little over 11% upside, but even analysts are saying 1325 is their consensus target, which if we get 1325, I think that puts us really strong in the realm of possibility of a short squeeze being able to effectuate it, but it needs to happen relatively quickly, I think, on this one. And on the backs of this catalyst, we'll see if it's enough of a catalyst to continue to push or not, and just kind of take it day by day. But tomorrow I'll be watching this zone, or even as we finish out the day here today. You see it's peeling back a little short of the previous high at the moment, so I really would like to see it stretch out of here and see what happens. If it gets over 12, does it trigger a bunch of buys and immediately thrust it into that red box, and then we'll sort of see how it acts there and act accordingly. All right, well, I hope that you had a good trading day, and I hope that you can finish off the week strong tomorrow. I really appreciate you watching, and I wish you the best of luck. I will see you in the next video.